Hi everyone, thanks for listening in and going to be watching this Threat Intelligence Briefing. My name's Aaron. I'm joined today by Patrick, one of our Threat Intelligence Analysts here at SecurityHQ. And today, Patrick and myself are going to be discussing some of the ongoing cybersecurity kind of intelligence that is being observed out of the back of the current ongoing conflict between Gaza and Israel. So Patrick, firstly, thanks for taking the time to take us through this. Just over to you, really give us a little bit of introduction about what we're seeing, what we're observing at SecurityHQ, and then we can look a little bit more in detail at some of the content you've got here to display.
Yeah, of course, with everything that's going on recently over the past few weeks, almost a month and a half now, nearly 2 months, the rising escalations in tensions in the region, especially obviously Gaza and Israel, we look at the cyber implications from that, and this depends on certain industries, certain organizations, certain countries across the world, not just to this region, and how it's been affected with everything that's been going on.
Amazing, super. So I think as we move through then some of this analysis that you've put together for us today, we're going to be looking at some of the pro Palestinian groups, right, and then also some of the pro Israeli groups. So the threat groups or threat actors, adversaries that either side with the state of Palestine or with the state of Israel, right?
Yeah, so this is a bit more of a political situation than we would probably be used to.
Yeah, for sure.
So in this, obviously, Gaza and the West Bank make up Palestine.
Okay.
And here's the state of Palestine, so pro-Palestinian groups side with them, and then Israel, which is the rest of that Levant area, make up the state of Israel, so pro-Israeli groups there.
All right, fantastic. So let's move on then to have a little look then about some of the pro-Palestinian groups as we've introduced just there on the previous slide. We've got certain groups that are either for or against a certain cause, and here are some of the main groups that you and the team have been observing that are what we believe in, and they claim to be pro-Palestinian.
Yeah, some of these are not new to us.
Definitely not, no.
No, we've got obviously Anonymous Sudan, which here in the region we are fairly familiar with. They were actually one of the first hacktivist groups to get involved, initially on October 7th when missile and rockets were sent into Israel by Hamas in Gaza. Anonymous Sudan helped by taking down the emergency warning missile alert systems that civilians in Israel use on a day-to-day basis to actually get notified when missiles are headed towards their direction. And these are hundreds of thousands of people have this application, and they were able to take it down. So it was that was a major part. And then obviously Killnet, which probably
we know very well.
Their name is probably the most common, the most famous here. They're a Russian nationalist hacking organization that actually work very closely with Anonymous Sudan. So as soon as Anonymous Sudan got involved, we kind of had an idea that Killnet were going to join.
For sure.
And they just targeted Israeli government websites, the most notable being Shinbet.
I think what you just said on Killnet is true, and I'll expand on it a little bit, because Killnet, when we saw the Russia-Ukraine conflict, obviously started off. Killnet were, I guess, at that point, very vocal in being a pro-Russian hacktivist group, and used that platform as a time to go and conduct various different attacks, mainly I think DDoS and exploitation, defacement, and then of which, like you mentioned, Anonymous Sudan have also been very closely linked with Killnet. And obviously at the moment, as we've written a couple of blogs on them and done recordings on them, is with Sudan, Anonymous Sudan, there's obviously a lot of political unrest as well in their part of the world, and they have also been very active and carrying out various different attacks against countries that don't support the new Sudanese regime. So it's kind of all coming back, isn't it, full circle? We're now seeing, obviously, we've had Russia-Ukraine, we've obviously had ongoing issues in Sudan, and now we've obviously got the Israel-Palestine, Israel-Gaza situation going on, and we're seeing these groups like Anonymous Sudan and Killnet back on their pedestals almost, carrying out their hacktivism. And then I know this is one that you and I have discussed fairly recently around the cyber Avengers, because seeing the Iranians now using, this is an excuse to get involved is an interesting one, because As we know, the Iranian threat actors are very well known and highly regarded, typically for their destruction more than anything else. They're not normally there to look for ransom. They're there mainly to carry out destructive attacks. I think the Iran do not need any excuse to target Israel. So it's interesting to see that we're getting some Iranian threat activity.
Yeah, this is almost perfect, really, for Iran and most of the APT groups. Not that they wanted this fight, but this was just they've been doing it for so long, so many years, always going after Israel and any other countries, industries, or organizations that side with them. So this was just they could put all their threat actors kind of on one country.
Yeah, and I think we talk about Cyber Avengers here as one of the most active, but I mean there are others that have been active, and I think from an Iran perspective, just one that I'll mention that's not here because they're more kind of they're called more APT, I would say. It's Imperial Kitten. It's one that we've sent some advisories on recently as well, and they're kind of very active at the moment, specifically in the region because of obviously everything that's going on. So just an interesting one to keep an eye on is the Iranian participants within this kind of activity we're seeing at the moment. So I think on the next then we're going to see a little bit more of a breakdown, right? This is kind of a breakdown of the groups that you and the team have been tracking.
Yeah, I mean there's so many. They're obviously they go so far across the world. You can see some of these countries here like Morocco, Indonesia, Sudan, obviously the many groups from like Iran and Iraq, Lebanon, and countries close to Palestine and Israel, but so many across the world,
Yeah, for sure. And what's I think maybe really interesting, and hopefully the listeners will feel the same way. It's the fact that there are so many groups that have mobilised. I think it's one of the largest mobilisations.
One of, if not the largest mobilisation of threat actor groups ever.
Yeah, which is incredible, right? For one geopolitical cause or geopolitical unrest that's taking place is the largest mobilisation we're seeing. So I don't know if this is going to be a precedent that we're seeing, like from now on, anything like this happens again or a similar type of thing takes place. Yeah, this is now kind of set the way or kind of laid the path for these activists. Now they have their Telegram channels, they have their groups they're in, have their kind of umbrella terms, if you like, an umbrella group. So it'll be interesting, and I think there's some more right on the next. This isn't the only list. So the list continues as well, which is crazy to see how many people are here. But I think, Patrick, from what I'm seeing on these pro-Palestinian groups, and we'll look at the pro-Israeli in just a second. The standout here is that DDoS seems to be the highest type of attack that is carried out, right?
By a significant margin.
Yeah, exactly.
It's 95%, if not more, on DDoS.
And what do you think the reason for that is? And the reason I ask is because I guess maybe in recent years we've typically kind of regarded to DDoS as maybe it's like a real kind of low level attack. It's it's very kind of we're not we have got protection in place. It's fine. DDoS is nothing, but actually we've seen a lot of DDoS activity recently as well, not before this conflict we're discussing today, where some groups have even held, there was one story of an airline being held to ransom for DDoS because they were consistently bringing down their booking system.
Yeah, you're putting them out of service, really, aren't you? You're not allowing them to conduct business. You're stopping, and everything's digital now. Websites and stuff that people do bookings on, payments through, everything, and you're just taking them completely offline. And that those few hours, a few days, a week probably, it can cause mass problems.
Yeah, it really can. I think one accelerator to this really has been the adoption of cloud, and I think the resources that are available to these various threat actors now, threat groups now using DDoS, was never really available to them at the scale it is now, and I think that's maybe a reason why we're seeing an uptake in successful DDoS attacks that are bypassing or circumventing various DDoS controls. So really interesting to see that that is coming back.
Yeah, obviously most of these would be usually probably ransomware. Most of these groups are ransomware groups, but they've kind of switched their whole game plan almost to DDoS and defacement. Also, we get
defacement, an interesting on the website.
General just data breaches
for sure. And I think so. Maybe next then let's look at some of these larger pro-Israeli groups that have been when we use the term larger, they are the more active. They have been the more vocal on their, various different underground forums, Telegram channels.
I think Israel, as we all know in the cybersecurity community, it has some of the most technologically advanced organizations in the world. So there's no surprise that maybe they don't have as many groups around the world that side of them, but in terms of knowledge and in terms of let's just say quality, they may have an upper hand. Maybe some countries like Iran and stuff have some of the best in the world. Yeah. But I'd say Israel are fairly up there, and obviously India's been a large supporter of Israel. That's why you can see this Indian cyber force and Kurla cyber extractors, let alone some others that we'll see based out of India have come out in public and have supported the Israeli cause.
And these are some of the larger groups, and I think what's interesting here compared to the last slide maybe is that on the main groups that are pro-Palestinian, there are a lot more familiar names that are relatively well established in kind of the hacktivist arena, whereas these maybe new or emerging groups that are maybe using this as opportunity to raise their profile. Maybe they'll by doing so they're going to raise their profile within hacktivism or hacktivist arena. So it's kind of interesting to see all these new groups popping up as well. And then I think we've got a bit of a smaller list compared to the pro-Palestinian, but these are also a breakdown of the kind of the bigger parts of the pro-Israeli groups that we're seeing.
But you can also see that these aren't just pro-Israel. These are anti Iran. You can see OP Iran, oppose Iran. Yeah. It's not just, and the same goes for pro-Palestinian. They're maybe not pro-Palestinian, they're just anti-Israel.
Yeah, exactly.
Or anti European nations or North America. They just, whichever side suits them.
Yeah. And again, the same specialities and the same attack types are common, right? It's DDoS. It doesn't matter which side of which side or which cause you are for or against. It seems to be the same technique is the most common. That is going to be DDoS.
Yeah.
Throughout. All right. Super. So as we move on then to look at some of where most of the cyber activity worldwide is coming from, since October 7th. I think what you've done, you've kind of distilled that down to 10 countries with the most activity. So just give us a little bit of a breakdown, maybe what's a surprise here, maybe what's not a surprise, and vice versa.
I mean, you can kind of see it with the correlation of where the APT groups, where the threat groups are coming from.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of started out initially just Israel, Palestine, and some of the surrounding countries. So obviously Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, and maybe some more Middle Eastern countries. Mm-hmm. But over time, with a lot of European nations taking a stance, especially with Israel and standing with them, we've seen a shift of threat groups attacking these European nations, the UK, Russia, Germany, France, Spain, Italy. You've seen that over time. But now, only in the past maybe 2 weeks, it's kind of come back to the region. And not because these nations are supporting one side or another. Some have, some haven't. It's more the fact that they're not saying anything. These countries are now getting attacked because they're trying to be
having a stance,
apolitical. Yeah. They're trying not to have a stance on things, which is actually causing more problems.
Yes, it's interesting, right? So I remember when we started tracking all this activity, like you said, we tracked it from USA, from the North Americas. Like you then mentioned, we then watched certain campaigns unfold in Europe on those countries, that have either have or haven't, given their support to. And then now, like you say, it's back in the Middle East region where we've seen a whole wave of campaigns against various different industries, but we'll come on to industries in a second. And I think really, just before we leave this topic or this point, I think the biggest point maybe to make to the listeners that this is not a siloed conflict that's going on. This is impacting worldwide. This is impacting customers and organizations across the world, right? And it's not just concentrated on the Middle East, and it shouldn't be seen as such.
Yeah, I suppose many people would think it was just confined to the region. I'm sure by now, maybe you have a bigger idea of how wide this spread is, and the environment is so large. You can't think, because it's so far away, it won't affect us. It could be on your doorstep tomorrow.
Yeah, really, and we are seeing that, right? We are seeing that case where
we're seeing groups all the way in South America. go for like the Palestinian cause. There was some in Ecuador.
Yeah, right, sure. So I think just as a final touch before we leave this slide is that this is really a global issue and a global topic, I would say, and it doesn't necessarily make a difference if an organisation in the Middle East or not. There's still going to be effectively scope to be targeted
for sure,
one way or another. Okay, so if we look at then maybe some of the industries, again, I think it's pretty obvious that some of these you'd expect to be on here. So do you want to just maybe touch on a couple and some of those stories, from what you've been tracking and what's been going on around the sectorial targets?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like when we were highlighting the 6 threat actor groups that were the most prominent at the time, you could see who they were targeting, and mostly it was government, telecom, media, and utilities. It was just more critical infrastructure or infrastructure that you can talk to the masses. So telecom and news outlets and anything like that has definitely been the most targeted.
I think, and we've seen this before, right, with other conflicts where power grids have been taken down and everything else. It seems to be that, the critical national infrastructure is always a target. So, your telco, your utilities, your oil and gas. So there's no real surprise. And I probably expect that you and the team don't anticipate this to change, that these targets here will typically continue to be the most targeted sectors.
This will always be the most, especially government. But like, for example, we're seeing that like internet service providers getting taken down, and news outlets. I mean, Jerusalem Post, AlphaNet, they've been taken down, and it just comes as no surprise, especially with a conflict where you're trying to reach the masses. You're trying to reach everyone and
raise a profile.
They're obviously going to, either side is going to try and disrupt that, destroy that. Hinder your chances, So
there's just a bit of a touch on some of those top targeted sectors. Really interesting to see that some of those are kind of the high profile CNI that you'd expect. So then just to maybe wrap up and finalise then, and if we put this all back into a MITRE attack perspective, which is obviously from a detection and response element, is what we like to do. So the top kind of 2 that maybe we'll draw attention to as we conclude is, obviously we've spoken a lot about denial of service, right? So that's going to be that's really your disruption to a service, and that's really most important when it comes to individuals, I guess, that are maybe relying on information on websites, payment revenue, like revenue generating systems as well, applications that are could be taken down, everything else. So that's a really interesting one we've been seeing. Then the second one, which I think is interesting and probably one of my favourite ones, because this I can link back to Arraign interactors quite nicely, is going to be the exploitation of public facing applications. And although it might not have been talked about a lot by these different threat groups and threat actors that are you've listed in this discussion, exploitation of public facing applications still remains one of the highest initial access vectors when it comes to threat actors.
It was before and it is now.
And I think it always will be. And I think again it's just a bit of a reminder to check that attack surface, understand which vulnerabilities are there, which could potentially be exploited, because like I say, it will remain to be one of the initial access vectors, for a long distance or a long period of time, and it allows persistence mechanisms to fall into place in different backdoors, and Iran and various different APT groups out of Iran specialize in this type of activity. So just a couple of top recurring kind of MITRE techniques that we're observing, I guess, at the moment.
And
anything you want to add on that?
We can't forget supply chain compromise. I mean, especially some of these organizations, some of these governments in these nations are probably fairly well defended. But those that they're affiliated with maybe aren't so much, and access via them is clearly up there with denial of service and exploiting public facing application.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that really summarizes I think what we wanted to discuss. I think maybe just as a closing word for myself, or maybe hand over to you, is thank you very much for you and the team continuously researching, creating these advisories that go out to customers. on a daily basis regarding all different types of threats, not just related to this ongoing conflict. And thank you for putting this research piece together that we can share with with customers.
No problem.
And I look forward to seeing what more you uncover. It's been a couple of months now since obviously you and the team have been tracking this.
Yeah.
But anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think that's about it.
All right, super. So once again, thank you very much for your time and the listeners as well. And if you've got any questions or need more clarity around anything that's been discussed, please feel free to reach out. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And thank you, Patrick, and for all the work that you and the team are doing. Thank you very much.
No worries.